That was the Rambam also was a doctor as well as a rabbi, and that was for health reasons. And the reason that I learned that he did it is because fish bones are generally very small and fine, and meat or fowl bones are bigger. So if you're looking out for larger bones and then you have fish, you might not look out for the smaller bones, and you could easily choke on them. That's what I learned. So it was a health reason. I know that somebody told me there was somebody else, there was somebody once told me there was another health reason why not to have them on the same plate, but I don't remember what that reason was. The other question was, well, not so much a question as a comment. Lydia mentioned about, sorry, you were sitting there last time. About somewhere else. It's fine, but in answering your question, that's why I pointed there. And about toveling the dishes, why we dip them in, sorry, you mentioned about dipping them in the mikvah being halacha versus a custom, so law versus custom. He said no, it's definitely a chiyuv. We do have to dip our dishes. And I asked about Jackie, you said about it being from Amalek, even though Amalek doesn't exist anymore. He said not from Amalek, it mentions Midian, and we take that as to mean all of the non-Jewish nations, not just from Midian, but that's who was specifically mentioned. So those are the answers from last time.
Okay, I've got 2 questions on the.
We haven't even started today's yet.
On the
Go on.
bits we were supposed to read.
Yeah, go on.
Okay. So my first one is in the booklet it gives the American kosher symbols.
Yes.
But it would have been nice to have the English kosher.
Yes, I didn't think to check before I published the booklet. So the general English ones, I don't have a picture here. So London would be KLBD, which is London Basin, right? SKA, which is the Sephardi Kashrus Authority. Yeah, what is it? FK maybe? It's Federation Kashrus.
Oh, that's the one on the time.
No, Manchester. The one on Heinz is MK, which is Manchester Kashrus. Then you have there's another Manchester one which doesn't usually make it around the country. It's local. So if you're in Manchester, I can look it up and let you know. So generally, if you have just a K, it doesn't mean much. Because anyone can use, huh?
Union.
Oh, the OU.
No, they just used to have a U in an O.
Yeah, that's called the OU, and that stands for Orthodox Union. They were the Orthodox Union of Kashrus. Neither do I, although I should.
You really should.
So K doesn't mean much because anyone can print a K, but the actual symbols are all. Thank you. That's what I'm thinking. Copyright now. That's the wrong word. They're all, yes, they're all trademarked. So unless somebody has an actual supervision from one of the kashrus authorities, they cannot print it. If the kashrus label has been pulled for some reason, they can no longer send out, they need to get rid of any things that had the label on it, any packaging. So they cannot use it if they are not under supervision. So it's only if they're under supervision, whereas a K, a plain K, anyone can print. People think that it's kosher, but it actually doesn't necessarily mean anything. We once bought a gallon of water in Walmart back at home, and it had a KD. I said, is this a problem? Because we don't eat dairy equipment stuff, and it's just, it was filtered water. And the rabbi said, no, K doesn't mean anything. They were obviously thought that it would make it look more kosher if they put KD. But no, it was not a problem.
Pam did us a really good favour. Did she send it to you, Paula? For the Philadelphia and the Borsan. And she found the codes out. It was fantastic because it's so much cheaper than the kosher green chicken.
Yeah. What is Borsan?
Oh, yeah. So long as you get a certain one, as long as you get the one that Pamela sent us that it work.
Oh, 54. I don't think. My other question
Yeah.
is on page 146, it says halal kun is not kosher. But if you look on our KLB's website, it is kosher. The thing is
So-
halal kun.
Right, so sometimes, so
Not fully fine.
I suspect they're using the wrong wording.
Okay.
Because you have, so this is one where people get really confused. Chalav Akam is not supervised, considered not kosher products. Chalav Stam is not supervised products, but because of regulations that the government have put in place, you can rely on those regulations and assume that it is okay. It's called Chalav Stam. And then you have Chalav Yisroel, where something has been supervised by a Jewish person from the milking process all the way until it's been bottled.
Yeah.
So Chalav Stam, which is what most cow's milk in this country would be considered when you go to a regular store and buy, was accepted. I believe it was Rabbi Feinstein who allowed it as a heter, a leniency, because people were finding it harder and harder to get the kosher Chalav Yisrael milk, and people were moving out of areas of general Jewish areas. And he said that because of the regulations that he said this in America, but in England, they have similar regulations that the government puts in place on what is allowed to be put in a milk product when you list cow's milk. Then it would be acceptable to those who find it difficult to get Chalav Yisrael milk. Now, interestingly, people use it as across the board heter. Oh, it's fine, we can use it. You'll find people that are quite strict in other things, but they will have Chalav Stam milk, even if they live in, we'll take London for an example, Golders Green or Hendon, when it's very easy to get Chalav Yisrael milk. And that's not what the heter was for. The heter was for people who it was challenging and difficult to get Chalav Yisrael milk. And therefore we could rely on the regular milk in the stores because of the regulations. That does not mean that you can go to any country and buy regular milk in the regular stores or what markets, whatever, because there's not necessarily the same regulations put in place. As a matter of fact, I was looking in, I think it was Hong Kong once, China, I don't know, one of the Chabad websites of one of these countries. And I think I was looking up the kosher or something for somebody, and it said, big bold letters, do not buy the milk in the regular stores. It is not kosher. It is not necessarily cow's milk, because they get lots of tourists, and in America and in England and I want to say civilized countries, there is a regulation by the government of what goes into cow's milk. So you can rely on that it is only cow's milk. People who are more careful will only have Chalav Yisrael. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
So the explanation, yes, on the app and on the website, call it Chalav Akum, but it would not then be it would not then be approved. So the word they're looking for, yes, the word they're looking for is Chalav Stam, and I don't know why they use the incorrect word. People tend to do that a lot. They call it Chalav Akum, and it's not actually the correct word. The correct term is chalav stam.
Perhaps someone can tell me this.
Yes, would you like to do that?
Does it apply to butter as well? I understand, I think I read somewhere, that it's if that, non, pig's milk would not turn into butter anyway.
So this is what I have been told. Again, people who are careful about only having cholesterol won't rely on that heter. But from what I understand, it was actually in England across the board, it was very acceptable not too long ago that any butter was acceptable because supposedly butter can only be made with cow's milk. I have recently been told by somebody, so interestingly, I have recently been told by somebody that there are other milks that make butter.
I would think,
Goat's
goat
milk
and
being
sheep
one of
would.
them. Well, they're both kosher animals, so
yes.
that would be okay.
Yes.
So maybe
But
that was,
you can get goat cheese and you can get goat, sheep's cheese. And, I think you can get goat's yogurt.
Yes.
yes.
as well.
And the children who's got allergies.
So,
Yeah,
so maybe the statement that I was told that only cow's milk makes butter was incorrect. And it's actually, the statement should have been only kosher milks
Yeah.
produce butter. I don't know. We only have cholesterol, so I sort of didn't really pay attention. But that's from what I understand, if you rely on that heter, that would be acceptable.
Sorry, I know you want to move on, but why don't we eat goat? Or why is goat not available? We eat goat's cheese and we.
Why is it not?
Probably,
I don't know.
because they're probably not been right for it, so they don't. No, but there's only no corporate because we've not been offered it. I think it might be that the goat's generally very thin. And therefore you wouldn't get.
Do not know there, as far as I know, there's no specific reason.
Maybe
I'll put it that way.
it's the hoops.
I would imagine,
I mean, generally goat isn't eaten in this country anyway.
I would imagine it comes down to finances, honestly, because it probably costs the same amount to chefs, the oversight, the what's it called, the overheads costs, but you don't get as much meat out of it as you do a cow. And chicken, turkeys are all easier to, they're smaller and quicker and easier to deal with.
And they're not bred, are they thinking about it in this country?
So I'm assuming that's the only reason why, but I don't actually know. I never looked into it myself.
The SPCA was talking about I think not possibly reintroducing orgy. So that the whole
Okay, what's that?
You're taking out this high.
Okay.
That you actually can't.
Yeah,
There's no very slowly. It's very difficult to find quarters, it's just certain.
good job. I had her dinner. Huh? I was just saying, good thing I had. Thank you.
Very expensive. They call it leopard land, but I don't know.
Maybe it's a front leg.
Yes, no.
I don't know.
It is a front leg. Yeah.
So it's not a problem. Right.
That's a shoulder. I think it's a shoulder. Well, the leg itself.
Well, the leg is not also the
same.
Then when people wealthier and they can afford not to do that because it's quite complicated and very technical. When it's not that the increase. They didn't know how to do it either.
Not my department. Not my department at all. Okay, so I hope we can get through this. Now that we're starting halfway through the lesson. Okay, who am I as a Jewish woman? A Jewish woman's place in traditional Judaism. What I'm going to start off by saying is that my notes start with 6 articles. which we are not going to read. They are very long, and at one point I was falling asleep because I was squinting at it on my laptop. That's before I read these 15 pages of notes. And I actually, sounds horrible, I should have looked at it before I printed, but I found articles a lot more interesting than tonight's lesson. So if we don't get through tonight's lesson, I'm going to send you the links to all the articles. I could do that anyway, but I found them really, really interesting. And at one point in time, I can't remember if it was in this class or if it was when we had the breakout, when we did the relationships. Somebody said about, why are all these things about women and relationships, and it was Esther, are always written by men, right? So interestingly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 6 were written by women. One of whom was one of my high school teachers, so that's why I got to the end of the article and I was like, no wonder I didn't like that one.
So why do you want to do this and not do those?
Because so it's not easier. This incorporates those ideas, and she talks through it a lot more in a smooth fashion. But personally, I found these a lot more informative and thought-provoking, and yeah, and this is sort of not dry so much as a very different kind of, these are much stronger. So yeah, but let's
I mean, I don't know what it means to be.
What does it
I'm a Jewish woman. I am a woman who practices Judaism.
okay. Are you sure?
Right, do the best I can with a bit small amount of knowledge that I've been had the opportunity to gain, opposed to learning by Nelly, next to my mum, who probably had no education other than what she learned from her mum.
Okay. So if we look at the next line, the Jewish woman's place in traditional Judaism, what do you think of? Or not?
Kosher meats, lighting candles, bringing out the children.
Not being involved in the service, being separated from the men.
Okay,
It's clean education.
okay.
Or that.
Anything from this side of the room? We have a clear split down the middle here. Okay. So all of those things. Tonight's class is supposed to be about, if we get through, the differences spiritually and fundamentally between, wow, folks have really been enjoying this hand today. I have a spider on it before. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Spiritually and fundamentally between men and women, masculine energy and feminine energy. And talking about Judaism's views on women and why women have a different set of responsibilities in Jewish life than men. Not, if you view it, it's interesting. So the first article I read, if women were men, and she talks, I'll send it around because I actually thought it was quite cute, is what I want to say. She said she overheard a conversation with her daughters talking to, who was that? That was on me. Talking about, they had a guest who was asking about, you know, don't they feel left out because they're girls, and that they can't do this and they can't do that and show them. And she said that the conversation was very interesting. She didn't bring over the whole conversation, but she turned it on its head and said, what would it look like if women did everything and the men didn't? It would then, the conversation would then be, why do we have to do this and the men don't have to do this, and why do we have to do that and the men don't have to do that? And it was a really interesting looking at a different perspective and bringing in the idea that in some ways we got caught up in the feminism that women have to do the same as men to be equal to men.
But women aren't equal to men, they're better.
There you go. So it's actually, again, reading through them, it really comes across as, so a few things that came across, and I'm not going through it straight through because I'd like to get the point across, and then we'll see how far we get. We have men and women, and we were created differently. Physically, men and women are different, right? Nobody denies that. Men and women are different. Well, I can't say that too loudly nowadays, but I think in this setting, it's safe to say that. Men and women were created differently. Physically, they are different. It doesn't mean that we have to do the same to be the same. And in Judaism, we have different roles, right? So you mentioned the family home, kashrus, Shabbos, chinuch, teaching our children and our families. Those are the things that we do, is an inner, the inner things, quiet, behind the scenes. It's not necessarily out in the public eye. And the things that we don't do, or if I turn it on its head and say aren't required to do, are the things that are a bit more public. The reading the Torah and getting called up to the Torah and shul, because not everyone can read it, davening, leading the davening in shul, and wearing a yarmulke, wearing tzitzis, putting on a talis, all the outer, very physical, very noticeable things. So in Chabad Hasidus, we have an idea of, and this is why I said, what were the words? Masculine energy versus feminine energy, as opposed to man and woman. And there are different things. We all have some of each. Women tend to be more feminine and men tend to be more masculine, although I'm sure we've all come across women who are more masculine and men who are a lot more feminine, but we tend to have characteristics, right? Women are more feminine and men are more masculine. So what does that mean? Again, reading through all of these, what felt like 100 pages. Women are more internal and are more receptive, right? You look, again, looking at the physical body and the way that we function, it compared men and women, not compared, we looked at the reproductive system. Men are external, women are internal. Women are the receivers, men are the givers. You find this often.
No, I only know that because women are perfect giving.
Yes, so interesting. Again, reading through this, it was really, really interesting that physically it's this, but it's more than that. Yes, it's a taking and a giving at the same time. Why? So while I was reading, I couldn't help. Now I feel like there's constantly things crawling on. I couldn't help but laugh because I keep seeing on Facebook reels, there's a guy who often videos his wife and he says things and she hears it and you see her response to things. But this one's come up a bunch of things with lots of different people videoing. And it says that whatever a man gives a woman, she multiplies and gives it back to you. You know what I'm talking about? Have you seen this? Right? So you give her groceries, she'll make supper and she'll give you a meal. You give her a house, she'll turn it into a home. You give her, I don't remember the other things. That kind of idea. So the same with having children, right? the man gives a seed, as they say it in Tanya, and a woman after 9 months produces a baby. We talk about, gosh, it sounds so easy like that. Huh?
It's the rest of their life.
Um,
20 years.
On page 159, I know I'm jumping, I haven't even started at the beginning. On 159, we talk about in Hasidus, we learn about the 10 Sephirot. Okay, I know I've mentioned before in other classes also, we have the intellectual, I can't think of the word Sephirot in English. I can't, characteristic traits. So Chachma is wisdom, and Chachma Bina is knowledge, and Das is understanding. So if anyone ever wonders what Bina understanding, Das is knowledge. Sorry, did I say it the other way? Sorry. The Chabad stands for Chachma, Bina, and Das, the intellectual set, if you will, of Sfirot, as opposed to the Chagat, which is Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, which is the first three of the emotional characteristic traits. So the Chachma is the idea, the concept. If you have an idea but you haven't fully thought it through, right? Like take this evening, let's have a celebration. Yes, great, let's have a celebration. That's the Chachma, that's the idea. Okay, now we have to understand, what are we going to do? Where are we going to have it? Where are we going to, and develop the idea. That's the understanding part, the Bina part of the Chachma. You take the idea and you develop it. So that's the same idea of a man being, yeah, sure. The door, huh? The man is a giver and a woman is a receiver, but we also give back, because we don't just receive and stop with that. Okay, shall we start with the actual lesson? That was some of the gist, and I think some of what I said will make more sense with the articles when I send them around. But if we start, would somebody like to read text 1? Yeah, go on, text 1, sorry, page 156.
Text 1 is And God made the 2 great luminaries, the great luminary to rule the day, and the lesser luminary to rule the night and the stars. The moon, sovereign of the universe, can 2 kings share a single crown? God replied, go and make yourself smaller. Sovereign of the universe, she said to him, because I made a proper claim before you, am I to make myself smaller? God replied, go and rule by day and by night. But what's the value of this? Cried the moon. What use is a lamp in broad daylight? God replied, go. Israel shall reckon the days and years by you. But it's impossible to do so without the sun for the reckoning of the seasons, said the moon. Go. The righteous shall be named after you, as we find Jacob the Small, Amos 7:5, Samuel the Small, Samuel 1:2, verse 19, David the Small, Samuel 1:16, 11, 17, 14. On seeing that the moon would not be consoled, the Holy One said, bring an atonement for me for making the moon smaller. This is what was meant by Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish when he declared, why is it that the he-goat offered on the new moon is distinguished in that it is described as a sin offering for God, Numbers 28:15? Because the Holy One said, let this he-goat be an atonement for me for making the moon smaller.
So this was a midrash that we're told that happened when Hashem created the world. He made the moon and the sun equal, they had equal light, and the moon said, we can't both be equal light. One of us has to be lesser than the other one. And he said, fine, you know, you'll be the lesser light. And the moon carried on complaining, if you will, that, but then how will I, you know, you're gonna have the, hold on, the seasons will run by the sun, and eventually he said, you're right, and we'll bring an atonement because I shouldn't have done that. Interesting, the way she explains it is that the moon realized that the world wouldn't be ready for two great well, let's put it here, crowns, two great rulers in the sky, representing the fact that we wouldn't be able to handle it on Earth either. And Hashem promises, though, that in the future, here it says, when the world is perfected, the shine of the moon will be restored completely. It's in Isaiah 30:26. And the way she explains it, and I never saw this before. Yes, we as a Jewish people are compared to the moon, where it waxes and wanes. You can see through history, sometimes we've had good times and sometimes we've had not so good times. It can also, a woman is very much connected to Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, and the wax, just like the moon waxes and wanes, we also have cycles. And I want to make sure I don't miss the point that she made. That was really interesting. This is where it was. That she says it's not just an interesting midrash, but it's also a metaphor for the conflict between the masculine and the feminine, and the evolution of the feminine role in the world at large. Women have a strong connection to the moon and to Rosh Chodesh, the new moon. The moon symbolizes the feminine energy with the waxing and waning of monthly renewals, cycles. In the beginning of creation, the moon was diminished, as was the world's perception of the feminine energies of nurturing, building relationships, understanding nuances. These ideals have been devalued as if they are less important than the masculine, aggressive, assertive public role. But Hashem assures us there will come a time when humanity will evolve and these values will change. There will be an era when we will reach our final destination, the era of Mashiach, when the role of the feminine will be fully understood and the moon will shine with equal brilliance and radiance. So she's not saying that the woman is not equal, but wasn't recognized. The feminine energies weren't recognized and valued.
I think that's probably quite a lot of what we see when they look at Judaism. They don't recognise that the woman's role is important because the men are all in the forefront and doing everything.
Yes.
That's true in society.
Yeah.
I mean, carers are mostly women. It's in the paid profession of being a carer, tend to be female, because it's not high earning, when really, I think it should be much higher earning than men who sit on their bottom behind them.
And yet, if you take it even further than that, in today's society, if someone is just a homekeeper, it's seen as a very lowly thing, which is really sad, because it's not just in the Jewish role, although in Judaism, we put a very strong value on raising a family and being at home and educating our children. And no, that doesn't mean you have to be home the whole time, but for being there. And yet in society, that's seen as something that's not valued and not positive. And because the women are often home educating the children, that's very much seen as the men being more important.
But also, don't you think that the women are softer and they're giving, whereas the man is, doesn't have that same feelings, and that's why there is.
So it's interesting because one of the articles addressed that. That's what I'm saying. The articles were so much stronger than anything I'm going to get across. But no, but generally, if you look in the world at large, right, who are the greats? The greats were the people who won wars. The greats were the people who fought. The greats were, right? They were much stronger, not the nurturing, not the softer, not the kinder, you know. Yeah, yes. But if you go back through history, that was what's the greats. And it's only in more recent, I don't even know if I'd say history, more recent years,
Contemporary.
yeah, that it's recognized that you don't have to be aggressive to be strong. You can be nurturing and kind and giving and still be strong.
It's interesting, isn't it? We have women's cricket on television. We have women's football available for people to participate and is valued. That's a really big shift. Really,
But women want to be equal to men now.
no,
That's why
I
they're
think
doing
they want
sports,
equal, they want equal opportunity.
Yes, but it's.
I think it's a bit of both, because do women have to have women's football to
But why shouldn't they have got
Be-
that in that sense, I guess, if there are females that are good at football, why shouldn't they have that?
No,
opportunity?
Yes. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but
It shouldn't
I
be the
think
be all and end.
we've gone so far, that- yeah, that people feel that we have to do the same to be equal. And whilst women might enjoy playing football or cricket or whatever else, they don't have to do that. Yeah, it's not a necessity.
I don't think they are.
I think it depends too.
Because they're doing it because they want to do it.
But now, but they weren't 50 years ago, it was not acceptable. Now, far more people are acceptable.
We just didn't do it.
No,
But do they want to do it just because the men are doing it?
I think they want to do it because they are enjoying what they're doing. Because they found that they're good at it. I don't know who cares. Well,
Yeah.
But there are that play football for England, don't earn in any way, shape or
No,
form.
there's
anywhere
still
near
that
the men's,
percentage divide
yeah.
and the tennis.
Tennis.
But with less separation in that skiing. You know, men and women both ski, we don't hear very much about it. Anyway, so.
Yes, please, thank you. So, yeah, that was an interesting, that it wasn't so much represent the sun and the moon representing the masculine and feminine, but it wasn't so much that the moon was I want to say renegated to the side, but that's how the world in general saw feminine aspects, and we've grown tremendously to where we are today. Shall we carry on with text 2 and 3 and see how we go? Thank you.
Text to the sun and moon, and the lights of the moon shall be the light of the sun. The connection with the moon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's got no notes on it. so-
God
Okay.
showed Moses the moon in its renewal and said, when the moon is renewed, that will be the head of the month. The other nations count by the sun, while Israel counts by the moon. The Jewish people are compared to the moon, and therefore we count according to her cycle. And he told the moon to renew herself as a crown of beauty to those who carries from the womb, for they are likewise to be renewed
and to glorify their Creator. The name of the glory is Eden.
So that comes from the blessing of the moon. I don't know if it's that's the one we say Shabbos morning, or when that's we say blessing the new moon, the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, or once it's actually Rosh Chodesh, you're supposed to bless the new moon at the beginning of the month. I don't remember. I don't know. The men do it. I don't pay attention.
Let's come back to our discussion of the men have their rules.
Yes. So interesting. I can't wait for everybody to read these articles. I'd be curious to discuss them next week. And as I was reading them, unfortunately, I only prepared about a couple of hours before the lesson, because if I would have prepared a week in advance, I think I would have sent the articles out. So please read and then let's discuss.
Are any of the things in the back here, because this one, the first one is by Sarah Esther Chris.
So
Is that one of those?
that's one of them, but only that one. The others aren't. I did check. Because I thought
I
we can go.
to start reading this, and I thought, oh, I wonder if this is one of those. And I
Yes,
think
it's
I'm
one of them.
afraid-
It's just the one. So she was the lady who came to speak last year at our dinner.
Oh, right. Oh.
There you go. Okay. So this is showing some of the connections between the Jewish people and the moon. As I said, we're compared to the cycle of the moon waxing and waning and our history, essentially.
Menstrual cycle, you know, generally tends to very often see. That's people's mood and the moon. It's a strange thing, but the moon has an effect.
Well, the moon has an effect on a lot more things than that. If you just think about the moon has an effect on the tides, right? And some fruits, vegetables, and flowers grow by the moon as opposed to by the sun. The moon shades. That's what they call that. So okay. Really
Really bad.
interesting. I don't know if I have anything different connected to the moon. I guess I don't think that. So one of the huh? She always reads ahead. So I'll just read this because it is easier. In a way, it's strange to identify with the moon. The moon is small, weak, struggling to give a little bit of light in the dark of night. We don't even always see it. The sun is big, strong, powerful, bright. Imagine a national anthem about a waning moon peeking through the night sky. The sun and the moon reflect masculine and feminine qualities. The sun is strong, the moon is weak. The sun gives, the moon receives. The moon is feminine because it has no light until it receives it from the sun. Just as physically, a woman cannot give life until she receives from the male. And since as a nation we identify with the moon, we are like the feminine nation, the weak nation, the sheep among the wolves, the dove among the eagles. We don't claim to have our own power and might. So are we weak, trampled on, worthless? Huh? So it's interesting you say that though, because if you look through history, I'm not sure about the worthless part, but throughout history, we've always been trampled on. Yes, and so does the moon. The moon always, Jewish people now.
Jewish women more than Jewish men.
Well, she was talking specifically about the Jews.
Jewish women more than Jewish men. In what sense?
Because women are generally thought to be inferior to men in society, or they certainly were.
In society, as so they were. This is where the first point came in, that's it was, and over times that has changed. And interestingly, one of the things she brings in is that they were in the general society, but not in Judaism. We have lots and lots of halachas, lots of laws where I mean, you look at the Ksuba, right? The Ksuba, and dating back to when it was written, whenever that was, I don't know. But it was written, it wasn't written in today's modern age. It was written in a time period where women weren't respected. They were inferior or treated inferior. And yet the whole Ksuba is making sure that the woman is taken care of. That she is the one who's allowed to you know, ask for divorce. She is the one who is allowed to speak up for her rights. It's all about the woman. It's all about looking after her.
And you to think we talked about the women, why is it so hard to get why the apple now?
Is a really good question.
Now, that would be an interesting thing for Joanne Greenway.
Yes, yes.
No, the jet fighter.
So, but yes, so it was at one point in time, Jewish, sorry, not Jewish women in general were considered inferior, but in Judaism, they weren't. They might have been the smaller voice, if you will, but that was the same anywhere in those time periods. It wasn't Jewish women specific, it was the society at large. And if you think about Jewish history, we talk about strong Jewish women and how they had an impact on their, whether it was their time period or their husbands or their families. Now it might make sense to us in the 21st century, but we're talking about a time period where women didn't generally speak up. They didn't have something to say, or they probably did have something to say, but they didn't say it. And you know, but yet we have multiple accounts of the Jewish women speaking up and having an effect. Last week's Parsha, 2 days ago, we had Korach, right? We learned about Korach. What happened with Korach? Korach rebelled against Moshe, and him and everyone who joined his party was swallowed up by the ground. How did Korach's rebellion start? 3 guesses. First you didn't count. His wife. His wife encouraged him. His wife said, why aren't you getting all the honor? You are one of Moshe's cousins. Why is Moshe, he's picking his brother, he's the leader. Why is he getting all of the honor? You can have just as much honor. And she egged him on. And she told him to start a rebellion. She also got swallowed up by the earth. Meanwhile, in the same Parsha, in the Midrash, we learn about Ben Peles. Ben Peles joined Korach's rebellion, right? And he came home and told his wife, and what did she say?
She said, you don't be any better off if you either you'll follow Moses or you'll follow Korah. You'll still be subjugated to one or other of them.
Yeah.
So don't
join in.
Don't join in.
The bottom line is she convinced him not to join the rebellion. Not only that, but to make sure that he wouldn't be tempted, she gave him wine to drink so he would fall asleep. And the next day when they came to collect him, she and her daughter sat outside the tent, uncovered their hair because they were religious men, and combed out their hair. So any messengers they sent, as soon as they saw women with uncovered hair, they turned around and they went back. And so they couldn't even get so far as to ask where On was and try to convince him to come to the rebellion, right? So you have 2 very, very different households, if you will, right? Korach and On Ben Peles. And both, we talk about, I don't want to say led by, because I think that would be the incorrect term for those times, but we talk about in Asia's file, we talk influenced by, that's a good word, thank you, Hillary, you're not on the ball. So we talk about in Asia's Chai, right, the woman being the Akeres Habayis, the cornerstone of the house. What does that mean, right? Doesn't mean you're at the bottom, doesn't mean, means you're the foundation. It means that if you have a strong foundation, you have a strong house, right? It's the women who influence and lead the way of the household. And we see that specifically from the story of Korach and On Ben Peles. They were both influenced by their wives, which way to go. One had a very bad ending and one had a much better ending. But if you think about Jewish women in history, we learn it throughout the time. We talk about women, and now it makes sense to us. Yeah, it makes sense that Miriam spoke up to yes, it was Miriam, spoke up to her father and said, you know, if you separate, the whole community is going to separate, and then we're not going to have a Jewish thing. It was Miriam who spoke up, but we're talking at a time period where that was not the norm. That wasn't the normal thing. Today, it might make sense to us because today women do have much more of a voice, but that very much was not the norm. So whilst it might make sense to us, if you put all of these stories in context in the time period, and it was unusual. It wasn't at all the Jewish women being the secondary or inferior.
But if you look back through all the stories from history, there are very few that connect to women compared to men. The ones that anyone knows of, you know.
That's because we're lucky in our own education.
Probably when I did
learn about the women.
No, but I'm just.
I don't know if they learn about anyone, they just learn.
Things you know about. Just, you know. Funny, I can't explain what I mean. No, I'm talking about in Judaism, you know, so there's not many stories about women compared to how many stories there are about men.
So
Maybe they weren't
interestingly,
written down and there was a lot more of them. but-
it could be, but interestingly, also, again, going back, if you put it all in context, right? There wasn't, they weren't knowledgeable. A lot of the people in history we learn about, it was because they were knowledgeable or they fought or they, you know, Jewish women were still modest behind the scenes. They were influencers behind the scenes. Yeah. Well, somebody once said, I like it better this way. That's a simpler form. Behind every great man is an even greater woman. Yes, yes. Slight difference, but much better.
Nurture the men to have power.
There you go.
And be in the forefront.
And when I did the Jewish women in history, I learned a lot because whilst I heard about some of the women, until I learned about them to teach a class, right? They always say that's the best form of learning, to actually teach something. They're fascinating. I think we just don't learn enough about them. There's a lot more women that did amazing things that we don't even know about. Jewish queens. How many do you know? Right. And she wasn't even a ruling monarch. There are 2 Jewish queens who were ruling monarchs. Yes. One of which was absolutely fascinating. We learned about one, Alexandra, what was her name? I can't remember.
See the word.
Yeah. Maybe that was her. Is that the same person? Salome Alexandra. And I don't remember the other one. And there was Bruria. Bruria was a great woman who at her time, now again, let's put it into context. She lived in a time period where a lot of only the scholars knew how to read and write. Forget about learn, right? Only the scholars knew how to read, write, study. She grew up in a rabbi's household, married a rabbi, so she had the privilege to be able to read and write. And she studied more than most of the men in the yeshivas. So much so that the rabbis, if they had an argument, they would come to her to decide it. Okay, again, we're talking in a time period where the women stayed in the house, didn't know how to learn, didn't know how to read, didn't know how to write. They ran a household. And yet Bruria made decisions, halachic decisions, that they said, yeah, it's going to be like she said, right? I heard her name. I knew she was knowledgeable, but until I learned about her to teach about her, I didn't know that. Would you have known that? I definitely didn't. But again, you put it in the context of the time period, right? Not just Jewish time period, but as a whole, in general society, that's amazing. You know, so there might be a lot more men that we hear about in history, but if you take what Jewish women of their time period did, it's way more forward thinking than anybody else in society at that time.
And that's all right, that's Tottenham. There's a line from the film that always resonates. It's from My Big Fat Great Wedding. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck. She can turn the neck any way she wants. Right?
There you go.
There was a queen called Sibylla. Yeah. Sibylla. She died on the 5th of July, 1190 in Acre. She was married to William.
A Jewish queen?
She was in Jerusalem.
Okay. Don't know. I only learned about the royal.
There's one called Ophelia.
There's a lot more than we realize, than we learn about, and I think it's a great shame. And it, again, if you put it into context of Jewish history, of history in general, it's quite amazing that we have so many. In one of these articles, it talks about who are the great women leaders in history, not Jewish, in history. And they were all women who fought wars or who won, you know, again, going back to the aggressive, that was the way that society in general realized people as being powerful and strong and great. You had to be aggressive, you had to fight, you had to prove your strength physically in order to be a great person.
Like Rudica. Go to see it. And I think all the English people here will have heard of Rudica.
Sorry.
Interesting.
Yes. Got that one.
The only woman in the Hebrew Bible reported as having reigned as a monarch in Israel. She's the daughter of either Omri or more probably his son King Ahab.
Who was that?
Her name is Athaliah, like David, but Athaliah. Never heard of her.
I've heard the name, but I don't know who, I don't know anything about her. But the name is
Okay, that's your
familiar.
homework. Research.
Too much knowledge, you know.
Okay, where are we at to? I'm lost.
Four.
4. Would someone like to read 4?
Okay, Jewish qualities. The three identifying marks of this nation, the Jews. They are merciful, bashful, and they do acts of kindness.
That's another way how we can be compared to we were talking about the feminine aspects versus the masculine aspects being more aggressive.
Some of the symbols.
Huh?
Yeah.
You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few. Shall I read on?
Sure,
God said,
because I think I've said that already.
Okay. God has a desire to have a home in the lower world, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. The Midrash explains that the Book of Song of Songs, authored by King Solomon, is a metaphor describing the ongoing relationship between God and his bride, the Jewish people. This verse refers to the time of the construction of the sanctuary where the Bethina, the divine presence, was once again revealed in this world, God's garden, after it had been distant for a while.
So this is explaining that Hashem wanted to have a dwelling place in this world, in this physical lower world. And he wanted a relationship with us here in this physical world. This world is Hashem's garden where we can become connected and united with him. How do we connect with Hashem? We spoke about this. Hopefully someone will remember. Prayer, one way.
But isn't it the home as well, where God resides in the home?
Yes. So mitzvahs. So generally we connect with Hashem through Torah and mitzvahs, prayer being incorporated into that. So yes, the idea of, so this is sort of on a more a wider view, if you will. We make this world a dwelling place for him. This is his garden. How do we do that? Through Torah and mitzvahs, through taking, we mentioned lots of times before, using this physical world for a Jewish purpose. So making our homes a Jewish home, doing anything we do, acts of kindness, helping others, tzedakah, eating kosher, all of these things we connect to Hashem, and we make not just our homes, but this physical world a home for Hashem, a dwelling place for him. And that's what it's, when it says I've come into my garden, my sister, my bride, that's I believe that is basically the idea. Sorry, the word has skipped my mind. These stained glass windows. An English word I couldn't even think of. The stained glass windows in the shul, the ones that came over from Boundary Road, the 6 in the front, right? So a bunch of them are different totem. The one all the way on the right is Basi Lagami. It's a garden. The idea of it being Hashem's garden. This world is Hashem's garden, and we, through our Torah and mitzvahs, we connect to him and we make this garden. Essentially, we are keeping up the garden. We do the upkeep through our Torah and mitzvahs. We make it a beautiful place for him to rest in, is the words I want to use. Shekhinah, you usually refer to the Shekhinah, the divine presence, as resting, dwelling. I suppose you could say feeling comfortable here, because the divine Hashem is spiritual. So how do we make this physical world a place that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, will feel comfortable? By making it a spiritual place. No, that doesn't mean turning everything physical into spiritual, but by using the physical world for a spiritual purpose. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. It then she goes on to explain how traditionally the way to do this was to conquer the darkness, uproot negativity and darkness, whether by fighting wars with people or regimes, or by fighting value systems that were against her values. It was a top-down approach. Remove the bad influence, enforce the positive behaviors with laws and regulations. But there's another way of making this physical world a home for Hashem, a place where holiness can express itself. Instead of aggressively battling the negativity, the inherent goodness and positivity in creation could be cultivated and exposed. Instead of imposing and overcoming, we can raise and elevate from within our reality, find the hidden good, light a little candle and reveal all that was there the whole time. This bottom-up approach, nurturing, cultivating, imbuing, developing a relationship. Both roles are vital for transforming our world into a godly one, our physical world into a divine garden. We need to weed and clear the debris, and then we can plant, water, and tend to the various plants, the garden and nurture them. We need to cultivate and bring out the buried inner qualities and potentials in all aspects of our world. These two roles are reflected in what we call masculine roles and feminine roles. Masculine role is conquering, overcoming, subjugating. When we fight the negativity, the spiritual weeds and debris around us by battling evil, literally with wars, figuratively with rules, regulations. This is using a masculine mode. The feminine is cultivating, nurturing, bringing out the inner qualities. When we reveal the inherent beauty in creation by working within the physical reality to uncover the holiness already there, cultivating the earth to bring out the beautiful flowers, then we are using the feminine mode. That was one explanation. The idea that there's two ways of doing that. Well, I said at the beginning, the negative, the fighting, and the more positive way with, she puts here, nurturing and cultivating. So what did she say? Top down and bottom up approach. And it's interesting because, again, referring back to these articles that nobody else but I read, it talks about that in very much in response in davening, right? In the way that we approach prayer, right? Prayer is often seen as only being in shul, when in reality we can pray anywhere. And I'm not going to say it nearly as well as this article did, but the men need the structure of prayer and the way that it is. It's interesting because one of the things said that, so why do men need a minyan? Why do they need 10 people to daven with? We can daven on our own. We don't need 10 people, right? People often say it's not fair. They daven with a minyan, we don't. Why do they need a minyan? So it's interesting. This is the first time I ever heard this. So this is the first time I ever heard this particular explanation. When the spies went in, they were in the desert, right? All the Jewish people had just left Egypt. They were in the desert. They were going to go into Israel, and they said, wait, let's spy out the land. Let's scout out the land and see the best way to enter, the best way to conquer, right? So they sent spies, one from each tribe. And if you recall, the spies came back, 10 of them with very negative reports and 2 of them with a positive report. And they basically ignored the 2 with a positive report because you had 10 people who had a very negative report. And like, surely if 10 of them said the same thing, then they must be right. And so they listened to those 10 people, and it was the same word was used for this group of 10 people than for for something else, the congregation. So basically, who didn't listen to them? The women, the children, it was all the men listened to these 10 spies and yes, we've got to listen, we've got to follow what they say. So this is the first time I heard the explanation that they basically need a group of 10 men to daven to make up for the spies that got it wrong. They need to, because they didn't think they could do it at that time period. Think of the time period. Put it into context, Sally. Women didn't go out and scout out the lands. And so they need 10 men, yes, to keep each other focused and to keep each other on, this is what we're doing now, right? Last time back in the desert, when they got together, 10 people, they only had negative things to say. Now we're going to give them a text. We're going to tell them what they have to say, and we're going to guide them and direct them to do next time you get together, 10 people, that you do something useful and positive. Which was very interesting. Again, I had never seen that actual perspective. So when people say, well, why can't we be a part of the 10? Why can't women make up the minyan? Why can't you? Because we don't have that same, we don't need it, but we don't have that same obligation of rectifying what they did wrong in the desert, because it was men who were part of it and not the women. So anytime we find in Jewish law, when you have anybody who has different level of obligation, you can't cover the other if you have different level of obligation. I'm trying to think of an example because the way I said it does not make any sense.
But it's interesting that women, I think, I don't know, I've not asked the question to many women, would use a prayer book for their prayer or pray, when I feel your own personal prayer, the conversation that you might like to have with God, you appreciate the things that we have, is not something we, in my experience, that we talk very much about, that is as valuable as reciting the prayers by rote. Whereas in actual fact, if I want to have I go down Snaresbrook Road and I watch the leaves go from nothing to being green, green, green. I find that a very amazing experience, which I feel grateful and appreciative of towards Hashem.
So it's interesting that you say that, because women are not obligated to go to shul and daven with a minyan, as we know, not obligated to put on tefillin, not obligated to do any of the time-bound mitzvahs. Hear the shofar,
But there is an obligation.
Women are not obligated to do any of the time-bound mitzvahs, which is a lot.
Right.
It's a lot.
But are they obligated to
The
do
prayers, which are generally the negative mitzvahs, don't do this, don't do that. A lot of the positive ones, not. Which is interesting. You talk about davening in the shul, because one of the reasons that we aren't required to daven in shul is because we naturally. Where did the structure of prayers today come from? Nope.
women?
Hannah. Hannah, when she prayed to have a child, they were in the Beis Hamikdash. They went to the Holy Temple because it was one of the foot festivals, and they went up to do sacrifices, and took them ages to get there, so they stayed for a while. And Elkanah was doing his thing, and he had another wife, Penina, and she was looking after the kids. And Hannah didn't have any kids, and she went and she poured out her heart, and she was mumbling, and she was crying, and she was swaying personal prayer, right? And Eli thought she was drunk. And he didn't recognize that she was praying from the heart. And if you look at Hannah's prayer, the aspects of her prayer, that's where the structure of our prayer today came from. It was based on Hannah's prayer, on a woman's prayer. So why are we not required to pray? One of the things is women naturally have the ability to pray. We don't need the words there for us. We don't need the structure. So why do we go to shul and take a siddur and daven the words that are in the siddur? Because over the years, through time, women in general, we have accepted upon ourselves to do these mitzvahs, right? Most women who come to shul sukkahs will shake the lulav and esrog. You don't have to, not required to, but we do. We give everyone the opportunity to do it. You still get a mitzvah for it. Still do it.
That's right now that you can take to around the section.
Yeah,
That's also.
give it, because we don't have to, it's not required, you still don't have to, but it's something else that we can do, right? A lot of the things that we do today, going to Shul Shabbos morning, you don't have to. You can stay at home and say your own things. You can write your own prayer book if you want.
My experience is that that's not shared with girls and women. You know,
So
we grew up, it was the only place I think to go to meet other Jewish people was probably in the Beit Knesset, which was a meeting place.
yes, so interesting you say that, because when I teach my bat mitzvah class, we learn that there are certain times that are more auspicious to say prayers. And when I teach them, I say, yes, there's a bracha to say when you light the Shabbos candles. Yes, there's a bracha to say when you take chal. Yes, there's a bracha to say when you go to mikvah. But those are times that you can add your own prayer. You can say whatever you want, right? When someone isn't well and you're sitting by their bedside and you say Tehillim, right? Do you know how many people after 1 or 2 or 3 Tehillim might just forget the Tehillim and say their own thing? And that's perfectly fine and acceptable. And that's part of the reason we're not required to go to shul, because we have the ability naturally to do that. And so, yes, the girls today, well, any girls I teach are learning that they can do that we have the ability, you know, when you're walking down the road, to appreciate the beauty that Hashem created, or I don't know, whenever else. Not that I can think of any other examples right now.
Yes. Rather than having a lot of repetition, the fact that I've been given the facility to have the income, to be able to have the ability to cook, to shop, all those things are what I'm grateful for. And it's not just repetition, it's the prayer. That
So-
doesn't make them right or wrong.
So a lot of what you just said is incorporated in the benching. A lot of that is incorporated. So interesting, the things that you're saying, as funny as this sounds, right? On Shabbos, we don't make requests from Hashem. Okay, we don't request things. It's more praise, blessings, thanks, that kind of thing. But you would probably appreciate davening during the week, because the Amidah has a lot more on every topic. There's both praise and requests, and there are opportunities in the Amidah to add your own thing. I don't know which sitters it would be in. I think the Art Scroll used to have at this point say add your own words about this or that or whatever, but there is that opportunity, but often we don't necessarily know about it, think about it. And I think people are often so set on trying to, why can't we have what the men have? Why can't we do what the men do? That they don't realize that they don't need, again, I feel like a broken record, don't need to do the same as the men to have those opportunities. You can go home right now and say, you know, praise Hashem for everything you appreciate or you feel thankful for, or we don't have to wait for Thanksgiving. I think that's American. I don't know what the equivalent is here. You know, you don't have to wait for Thanksgiving. It's really funny because we have this argument on my family group every year, twice a year. Mother's Day and Father's Day. And half of the families say, oh, you know, whatever. What's the right words for Mother's Day? Saying Happy Mother's Day. No, but thanks for all you do, blah, blah, whatever, right? And now I just ignore it. Huh? You say the same.
My children say every day is Mother's
So,
Day.
right, so interestingly, in this country, Mother's Day has,
I'll find that.
yes, but Christian origins. Yes, Christian origins, whereas in America, it doesn't as much, which is interesting, because we actually looked it up, because we had a real argument once about it. We don't do Mother's Day.
Going back to the mother church.
So I don't remember, I looked it up, I don't remember, I just remember it's Christian origins.
After the Easter holiday, single payments, it goes, that's where it comes from, Mother Sunday, is the day after the Easter break, when the servants were paying the day on, and they could go and take their care.
To do with the mother church.
I thought that was Boxing Day.
That's,
Well, if
Boxing Day,
they went back to visit their family, their mother, they would go with their family
that they
to the
They weren't
church
able
that
to
was
celebrate
their mother
Xmas because
church.
they weren't
Because
the
that was where
servants,
they
because
went
they
to
were
go.
working, so
Yeah,
they
that's right.
celebrated the next day.
I think it might
Um,
depend upon which church
but-
you were a member of.
Good job, I found it now.
No, it doesn't matter to me.
Church sounds
It's not, basically. It's become commercial here too, but so it's a big thing, and every year we have this argument, we don't celebrate Mother's Day, we don't celebrate Father's Day, and fine, then we just ignore it. But
Is that because of
and-
the religious connotations it goes with?
Father's Day is very.
yes, but also, if you look at Judaism, we have the concept of kibbutz aim, right? Honoring your father and mother. It's not once a year. It's every day. You're not supposed, interestingly, last week. When was last Shabbos? Not this past one, because half my kids weren't here. But last week, oh yeah, it was still, I put him to bed early, it was nice. Anyway, the Shabbos before, we were playing a game. So there was one game, we have a big dining table, and one game was happening at this end. So a few kids were gonna play at the other end, but usually my husband and I sit at the other end. And one of the things about kibbutz aim is you're not supposed to sit in your parents' seat. Now, personally, if we're not sitting around the table like to eat as a formal meal, I don't think of it as my seat, because during the week I sit here to work and I sit there to work, and it's I sit all around the table. But one of the older kids, I don't remember who it was, said, can I sit in Tati's seat to play this game? He was sleeping, so he wasn't going to know the difference. But it was really interesting. They had learned it more recently in school about it, and he wouldn't sit there. He asked permission first. And so it's Mother's Day and Father's Day is beautiful, but
Father's Day is very much a modern.
Commercial.
yeah,
commercial.
commercial. Oh yeah.
They
I
felt
mean,
left out.
we didn't have
They
Father's
wanted
Day when I was a
equality
kid. But about the sitting in parents' chairs, as a child, I wouldn't have dreamt of sitting in my father or my mother's
There
chair.
you go.
And I don't think any of the
That wasn't in our mind.
other friends, non-Jewish.
No, everybody did have
It
their place.
was,
It's their place in the living
Never
room
seen
and the dining room.
that. Yeah, so.
So, but
it
it's
was not just a Jewish idea, it was a.
general
normal,
idea.
General.
Well, I doubt anybody has that idea now.
Respecting your parents.
But that's the thing, if you have that respect on a daily basis,
Not
Father's
all
Day
parents,
and Mother's Day is
not all parents
commercial.
are able to, maybe their behaviour is such that it doesn't, that their children don't feel safe.
That's a completely other discussion.
Okay.
Now, just to
tonight.
put the question out there, right? Does a parent have to be deserving for them to be not respected, I guess? honored. If someone is your parent, do they need to deserve that respect, or should you give that respect anyway, even if they're not deserving? I'm not saying there's an answer to that, but something to think about. Just conscious of the time. I think if we stop there, I touched on no, let's try and do page 160. Hold on. Huh? No, we're gonna skip to 160. Sorry. Okay,
Done the first one.
huh?
Did on the first one.
So why aren't women counted as part of the minion? Yes, I believe we did that. The other point over here was that soul, as the way we know it, being central to davening is a much more recent thing. In the olden days, there wasn't even the prayers 3 times a day. They used to bring sacrifices in the temple, which was also very male thing, but women didn't need to go to shul to pray, as we were just saying, and they often didn't, because they were home looking after the family. So they didn't want, why are the women have a small space in the back or the galleries? Because they didn't need as much space in shul, because there weren't as many of them. So it's not that they were specifically put in the back, but that there were fewer women. They needed smaller amounts of space, and because fewer of them were going. Another thing it says here that interestingly, or not, because we've discussed it, we know it, that shul is such a small aspect of our days and our lives, and that we said the woman's role of being the educator and at home is so much more important than however many hours somebody is in shul. And it's, even if they go every day, 2-3 times a day, it's
The 1/7, the rest of the week we're doing.
probably not even. But yes. And interestingly, if a community only has enough money for either build a mikvah or to build a shul or buy a tourist scroll or anything like that, a mikvah takes priority. So even if you don't have a shul, you don't have a place to daven, you had the money to do one thing, a mikvah takes priority.
So why haven't we got a mikvah here?
Excellent question. You're the new fundraiser for the new mikvah.
That's still really that still.
Yes. It's not very nice, but yes. But my dream, I even can tell you where it's gonna go. There's a nice corner in the back there, and they built a beautiful garden in front of my mikvah. I'm ready to go, but it's to put a mikvah in the back garden on the shul grounds over there, huh?
A mobile.
So it's really hard because a mikvah has to be connected to natural water, not necessarily running water, but
Yeah, yes, I mean.
On the front of your house.
Oh,
Oh,
that's why the park is always
And-
in the rain, because of the.
so there's a spring.
that comes down.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Do you know how much easier that would make it?
There was the most beautiful willow tree.
Oh, yeah.
in
I
the
heard
front.
about the willow tree.
Oh, very nice.
Evidently, it's where our kitchen now is.
Oh, really?
That's what I've been told by a number of people.
I can't remember.
But
Just under the willow tree.
so interestingly, talking about building mikvah really quickly, my grandfather was an architect for many, many years. He only recently stopped doing plans. So he not religious. I used to think he didn't know anything about anything, but little did I know he designed and built many mikvahs over the years. There was one mikvah in New York on the top of a hill, evidently, or something, that he designed a mikvah, and a mikvah the pool that someone dips in has to be connected to natural water. So it doesn't have to specifically be running waters, but it has to be natural waters. And there's complex ways of collecting this natural water. And when they dug down to build the foundations, they found a natural spring, and he redesigned the mikvah so that they use the natural spring instead of having to build something to collect rainwater. So lots and lots and lots. Yes. Yes, we can do a visit to a mikvah. We can make it as a trip. So I like the Southgate mikvah. Anybody who's seen Stacey Daly knows that I like the Southgate mikvah. Yes, that is the one. It is behind the, what's it called? Southgate Cockbusters Shore. Yes. We went to the mikvah.
Yes, yes.
We went to the Southgate mikvah.
I didn't know that. She said about the rabbi. Yeah. She did. She did.
I heard.
Yeah. Rabbi said Saturday.
Yeah.
Aren't you be surprised? Come on.
They asked her what was, I only know this because I shared the clip. Yeah.
Because he was told by 3 other people.
I went all the way through it and I couldn't find it.
Oh, no, she asked. Was asked
only like 20
seconds for the episode she's done. She said, and she still wasn't so many. She said
The rabbi.
She wanted thousands and thousands. I suggested we see if we could get her as a fundraiser,
Yeah.
but the amount of money she wants, she wants money.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you're nothing too much. You might not want any money.
We've been trying to get her for Friday night dinner because she
Yeah.
never came to us for Friday night dinner when she stayed over. And we're still waiting.
Seriously, you invite her to help us raise money. She
Mhm.
makes a full.
I doubt it.
She should come and do the comedy train. Marty,
Thank you on the floor.
make all the tea at the end.
Okay, mechitza. So why? Huh?
You're in charge of that.
We were talking about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur today, actually.
Don't need it anymore.
I haven't needed it ever, Zach's never eaten it all the years I've done it, honestly. I've
You
never had a
see, the
child
thing
using
is,
it, I've just always done
we
it.
can't not ask Beverly now because she comes with helpers.
Yeah. We went to pizza.
So when we advertise Yom Kippur lunches, it's not for everybody, it's for the kids.
I get that.
I have had some adults say, not those who need it medically, but some, oh, we're doing lunches this year. Yes, if you're under bar and bas mitzvah. Yes. Okay, so mechitza. Again, often people see mechitza as something putting women in the back or on the side, or so if we just look at it practically, yes, it is the men who take part in the service. Yes, they're the ones who are called up. So why do we have to sit separately? If you think
Men don't get distracted.
Distracted,
Yeah, that's the word.
that's a very simple explanation. Yes. So if you think when we're davening to Hashem, if you think about praying to Hashem is a very powerful thing, right? We go through it. Yes, we often read the Siddur by rote, right? But if you look at the words, don't read it in Hebrew, read some of it in English. Or if you think about it, if you have something you're praying for, whether it's thanking Hashem for something that happened, or you want or need something, whether it's health, whether it's financial assistance, whether it's anything else, or you did something that you want to ask forgiveness for. Yes.
Is that the football?
Yes. So- yeah. So,
I was gonna say.
if you think about really trying to, something to focus, right? You're not gonna do it sitting in front of the telly. You're not gonna be able to concentrate if you're sitting with your arm around your spouse. You want to really be able to focus on what you're thinking about and concentrate what you're.
Of the same gender can still put you off. You know, the men are talking next
Yes.
to you.
Yes.
That's just as
Um,
distracting as, I mean, I think. You know, women distract us. It's
Slightly
a bit of
less-
a good excuse, I've got to be honest, but that's me.
Slightly less
think the men might
like.
But interestingly, and this is something that happened from experience. When you have mixed, so you ever, see, can you stop, please? Thank you.
That sounds like something straight out of
If you ever have mixed do, and then afterwards, when you have a kiddish afterwards, all the men talk to the men and the women talk to the women, right? And then you have a separate thing, and you have afterwards, they all mix and talk to each other. But anyway, when I was working in Chabad of Scottsdale, I was working in the office, and really interesting. The rabbi used to teach a weekly class. One of the mornings, I can't remember, Wednesday morning, let's say, a parsha class for women, only women. One man wanted to join. He said, I don't have to be a part of it. I'll sit in the back. I'll sit quietly. I won't ask any questions. I'll just listen, right? So he asked the women, he had regulars who came every week. He said, do you mind if he comes but doesn't join in? And they said, yeah, fine, whatever. And he came and he said, after about a month, he noticed that the women weren't asking as many questions. They weren't as open. They weren't, he sat in the back, didn't say a word, didn't
He was
ask any
still there.
questions. He was still there. They didn't feel as comfortable. So, and he said it was an eye opener for him because he didn't realize it would make such a difference having someone just sitting in the back, right? If you ever taught in a classroom, had someone sit and observe, right? It's not easy to teach the same class and teach as freely as you do when you're being observed. So it's the same kind of thing, right? You don't feel as open. You're not able to be, as the word she used here is vulnerable. You're not able to be yourself in a mixed crowd. And
they consider the rabbi as well.
huh? So he was the one who was teaching, and they felt comfortable asking him questions and being open about what they thought and their ideas, and he was able to speak to them. But having another man in the class, even just sitting in the back, not participating, they didn't feel comfortable. And they didn't say it. They didn't even say it. They didn't express it. He just noticed the difference, and he asked him to stop coming. But the man couldn't understand why. He's like, I see it. You might not, because you weren't here before when you weren't here. But he saw a difference, and he did. He asked him to stop coming. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's not necessarily that it's a distraction. It's that you can't just be yourself and be open and vulnerable in the same way you can in a single.
But we're all in the same room. The men might be ahead of him, you know, in front and with behind or alongside. So upstairs, downstairs, see each other. We're still all in the same room. So that's, you know, like the pictures are some are completely covered and some aren't, kind of thing. But I just don't know that I get that point of view, but being in shul, I suppose it depends on the men really. The women there would distract them. I think maybe noise would be more distracting than actually looking. I don't know. Just my opinion.
I know, I don't
So-
feel comfortable in our shul because I was used to the boundary room. That was upstairs, the women were upstairs. And I thought I would get used to not being upstairs, but I still haven't got used to it, even though I've been here
I'm so pleased.
12 years.
It's because
Sorry?
you get used to what you're used to.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
we've had
I
these
can't get
conversations
used
with
to
Elizabeth
not
at the
being
reception.
upstairs.
And it does, we're both, Jason and I walk out there, we find it really weird. And it's what you're used to, you've grown up with it.
And the funny thing was, a few years ago, before lockdown, I went to Lyon just for a holiday, and I went to the shore there, and it was just the same as Boundary Road. And I felt much more comfortable in there, although it was the first time I'd been there, I felt more comfortable than I do here,
Very
even
interesting.
now.
So many, I think that have galleries have brought their women down to there.
But I think that if you've always had a student law, that's what you're used to, that's what you're familiar with, so it is gonna be more comfortable to go into one of the
I think that's just more, yeah, what you're used to.
We're used to them.
And you just come on the phone, and this show is very versatile, they have all this kind of level. So you were used to being on stage. In the wet, I'm not the wet.
So, yeah, yes.
Clarence Avenue is now.
Not Beverly, noise can be a distraction. You can have lots of distractions. I mean,
Yeah.
during the women's dinner, a bird flew in whilst, was it while Sally was speaking? Deborah was speaking, while someone was speaking. That was distracting. And that was all women. But I think it's more the idea of you might be distracted, but you can be yourself and open, and you can focus more on what you're doing. You can, tune out the laughter of your friends more easily than the opposite gender. That's the thinking. Okay, shall we try to carry on? Rabbis, why can't women be rabbis and cantors?
There again,
Okay.
if the woman was standing up in front of the men would be looking at the woman and not concentrating on the.
modestly, she was dressed modestly, it was better.
I actually think that the men are causing a problem, because we're making an assumption, it's like all this stuff in the news about a woman dressing inappropriately, so it's a woman's fault, not the man's fault. But like you say, if the woman it's the way,
Perception.
not always, but way men's mind works, and they look at the woman as the woman, not as what they're saying.
Really interesting.
Yes.
One of
Words
these,
that come out of the orange.
so one of these articles, it spoke about modesty, which I didn't touch on. We sort of skipped part of that, and why we dress covered up. And no, it's not because then men can take advantage of you, because they should be able to control themselves,
That's
right?
society I'm talking
Yes,
about.
I know society, but it's the idea of the fact that we value ourselves and we don't need to, yeah, we don't need to, thank you, in order to be, feel beautiful or to feel valued, or important, or any of these other things. And if you have something, I don't remember, again, I'll send you around the articles, but if you have something that is important to you, you don't put it on display and expose it. You're going to keep it safe and not necessarily hidden, but possibly covered. You might put it in a glass display case so that it's locked away. No, I'm not saying everyone should wear shared clothing now. But you're not going to just put it out for anybody to see.
And covered up, that leaves more to the imagination.
Yes.
So it's not, I mean,
Yes, it's it has been played, but it's better to be. It's almost sexier, if you want to put it like that, to be slightly more covered up than it is to be totally uncovered, because it. People might wonder.
Imagination.
What is that?
I was only doing.
And clothes cover a multitude of bulges.
When he bears his woman, it's not his wife, who I've met numerous times, we get on both. By covering her up like that, I think it's a sign of immodesty to make sure she stands out in a crowd like that. She can dress with modesty without having to cover her face and, you know, Jewish women, you wouldn't put Jewish women.
How do you take that?
I tell my wife that in time that it's her decision. But it was.
Some young man.
So what I learned is they're expected to cover their faces when they're wearing makeup. Not in the presence of other women or family members, but when they're out and about, if they're wearing makeup. So if they're going to a party or something and they're all dressed up, then that's when they cover their faces.
Anyhow, whenever.
I don't know, that's what I meant, the legal, the law is officially, that's what I've been told. I had a cleaner a long time ago. So-
Oh, yeah, she's lovely and you.
So, and being modest doesn't mean that you need to look ugly or thank you, frumpy. It's
Sometimes though, you go to places in the summer like South Bend or whatever, and you see very ultra religious people, like Iranian people in the summer, and they're dressed so hot, and you think, how do they cope with
That
that?
applies to very religious Muslim women.
Yes,
Anybody
absolutely, yeah.
following the rules of.
Yeah.
And if you go to the shops now, it is not difficult to find modest clothing.
Yes.
It's not
Swimwear, everyone is wearing well.
section, modest clothing, yeah.
that's new.
Lovely, that's nice. And I was in Marks and Spencer's, and I stupidly said, what's brown underwear? Right, instead of thinking, brown underwear, brown people, brown people. Okay, well, I don't wear pink underwear because I've got flesh coloured skin. I wear whatever colour I fancy.
That's like there's now different blasters, different skin tones.
Really?
Yeah.
With snakes on.
Mine is like the ones with spaceships on,
But don't want it to show.
and they don't have
If you've got
spaceship
dark
skin.
skin, normal blasters wouldn't work.
Okay,
What really throws it is when I see every old rabbi and a lady with the thing and the, oh, I just find it.
So that's, if you ask me, that's a misguided view. Because that's very much trying to be like the men. Meanwhile, they drop so many other things.
Sorry, no, I just said about this before, I've seen rabbis in and out of hospital, women with kids. Yeah. Yeah. Wearing a top, no, a rabbi, a woman rabbi. Yeah.
I say, yeah.
Oh, I taught Belinda a female reconstructionist rabbi's son in Fader in Arizona. I don't even know what reconstructionist Judaism is. She came to shul once to the Chabad and she had her rainbow kippah and her rainbow tallit, and she stood right next to the mechitza.
Oh.
It was a very interesting experience.
Respect them, but they don't respect. No, they don't. That's where I'm from.
We've got a friend who was like single when that. And she had to go to shul because of the boyfriend, and she had consented to go to school. And she hated it. She hated everything about it, and she didn't want to go to shul with it. She's now gone reform, and but strangely, the lungs going to shul, she was taken to it like a deductible, but she's gone the reform way.
So
in some respect, you think to yourself, well, she's got her religion.
albeit it's not what we would do, sort of thing.
But she now goes to shul.
Which she now goes to shul, which she never did.
And she probably knows quite a lot because
She really, she gets called up, that as there won't. She was, a husband, Cora, I believe, yeah. And, you know, it was interesting, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't do it for me, but you know, these people are, they're just, they say, how can you sit in the shul when you sit behind your men? You know, I've had that before, you know, but this is our upbringing, this is how we.
That's
were
it, it's what
told.
you're used to.
That's it.
But what do we think about women who choose not to do it in front of men, but would want to learn to do the legs? An ability, because it's something that they're interested in, the same way of reading Latin.
Well, it's like women having me young, yes.
You can learn to lane, but I'm not sure I'd see the point of it, because if you can't do it, you can learn to lane. I can send you a link to do that. There's on Chabad.org. On Chabad.org, I love following sometimes because I went to a co-ed school through 8th grade. Was the only at the time, now there's loads, but it was the only Jewish school in Arizona, all of Arizona, in the whole state. And it was co-ed, and because the boys learned, when we learned Chumash, we learned the truck to give them a head start for their bar mitzvahs. So I learned basic, I learned basic truck. Not that I can do it now, because I can't even sing one song to a different tune. I get really thrown. I get so confused. But the chop, and there's some, when I follow along, sometimes I go home afterwards, I say, you didn't do the chop very well today. you were following very well.
And I listen to it, and I can sort of hum along to the kind of a certain syllables.
There's repetitive
Patterns.
yes, sound combinations in that evidently you get used to and you do it a lot. I don't know.
I'm saying,
But there are sounds like the shalshalas, which goes shalshalas 3 because it goes up and down 3 times. It's only found in the Torah either 7 or 9 times in the whole thing. So I love when it comes up because it's quite exciting because it's only 7 or 9 times. But that's the triple of the pazer, which goes and then the little dot goes down, it's revi'i. And so it's quite simple to pick up. You can definitely, there's online things that you can learn to try if you so wish. Okay, I think we spoke about modest clothing. That's the last one. We spoke about time-bound mitzvahs earlier. Sorry, we jumped all around. As far as tefillin, yarmulke, and tzitzis, no, usually we do follow the book and we do sort of follow
women were at home and the men went off to shul.
but they didn't. There wasn't the concept of shul. They used to bring the temple.
Okay, so maybe it's much more
modern.
Yeah.
So when was the shul built? Middle Ages, I think they started.
It was
The one in Prague is 1200 or something.
So
But there's not really a women's bit at all there.
so it's
Built on, yeah.
the temple. When was the last temple destroyed? I don't know. Gosh, I'm not good at dates. You're really testing me.
So
When the temple existed.
The first temple was built years after they went into Israel, right? It stood for 410. One of them stood 410, one of them stood 420 years. There was 70 years in between. So we're talking lots of years, right? And then it's many years since then. So it was sometime after that. And even they didn't have shuls right away. It took them time to establish communities and figure out the best way to move forward, kind of thing. And what they were going to do to replace the temple offerings. And so shul is a much more modern thing. Tzitzis and tefillin are much older, because we learn about Korach, going back to Korach. Korach challenged Moshe Rabbeinu. One of the things he challenged him with was, he said, to see if he knew the answers, if he was so smart, was at the time, we don't know what color the tcheles blue is, right? Have you ever gone to Israel and seen tzitzis where one strand is blue? Right?
They always.
Right, so they did used to, back in the day they used to, now they say we don't know where we get what the actual blue color is. There are some people that say they do know. So one of the Korach's things was, if you have an entire garment that's tcheles, that's that blue, do you still have to have a string that's tcheles blue? Like, what's the issue? So we know that they wore tzitzis even back then, back in the day. We know that tefillin it's in the Torah, right? If it had the format that it has today, probably not, because we know that the tefillin they wear today is based on Rashi. My boys and my husband wear 2 sets of tefillin, not at the same time, one after the other. Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, I believe they were not quite contemporaries, but a generation apart. And they had different opinions of which, I think the difference of opinions is exactly what was written inside the tefillin. There's 4 different parts inside the tefillin, 4 different scrolls, and exactly how it looks inside the tefillin. From the outside, it looks exactly the same to me. But there's Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So that came about, the exact format of the tefillin came about further on. Yarmulke, I don't know when it came about. I know that anybody who was at the women's dinner and heard that we learned when the differences of the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi Jews started. One of the halachas I know of Sephardi Jews is they don't wear a yarmulke the whole time. They wear it when they're specifically doing mitzvahs. So that's a difference. So that's you see lots of, I want to say, quite very traditional, very, not necessarily very like religious dati, as you would say, Haredi Sephardim, but very, very traditional. They do lots of other things and keep Shabbos and kosher, and they won't wear a yarmulke, and it looks shocking, but that's the halacha for Sephardim.
if they're walking along the street and they suddenly have a chance to do a mitzvah
They
or
get
something, they get out.
I guess so. I'm not sure if it's any mitzvah, like if you're going to give tzedakah, or if it's a mitzvah when you make a bracha. I'm not exactly sure of the details. I just know that that's one of the differences. So those are more modern things. But then again, if you look at the shul, again, if we take the shul is one small aspect, of our Jewish life, right? We have so much more beyond that, from what we do at home, what we do outside, when we're out and about, when we're eating, when you go shopping, the clothes that you buy, the food that you buy, anything. That the shul is really not, I know lots of people like to harp on, oh, women aren't allowed to this, women aren't allowed to that, but we have so many other opportunities, not just to do things ourselves, but to educate others and to teach the next generation, and to raise good mention, I guess would be the word. There's so many opportunities beyond what we do in shul. It's not the be all and end all. As we learned in recent times in COVID, we will now say that in history, that we learned during COVID that the shul is not the be all and end all. Community, yes, but we found other ways to connect and adapt.
But has that connection kept people within Judaism, or did it motivate people to do less?
The same people used to come to shul now, still will come back.
Yes, but and yet we made connections with far, far more than that. And we haven't managed to sell the benefits.
But the show is not the be all and end all.
No, it isn't. And of course, we don't know what we don't see to.
Yeah.
We don't do it. And during COVID, we did meet up with people who participated in effort, but we don't know what they do now.